Human history has always gone hand in hand with the creation of tools. Some made to build, others made to destroy. And if there is one thing humans have always done with frightening creativity, it is inventing new ways to eliminate their enemies. Today we are going on a dark and fascinating journey through time. We'll go from the very first weapon ever created by humans to the most powerful and deadly weapon humanity has ever seen. We begin 2.9 million years back. The Stone Age. Long before empires, armies, or organized wars, when humans still lived in caves. For much of the Stone Age, the most effective weapon was exactly what the name suggests: a stone. A single well-placed blow was enough to crack a human skull like an eggshell. And it was not only used in hand-to-hand combat. Stones thrown with force could incapacitate or kill before the target even realized the danger. Until someone had a revolutionary idea. Sharpen a stone and attach it to the end of a branch, and just like that, the spear was born. A simple weapon, but one that changed everything. Then later, around 70,000 years ago, a new problem appeared. What if the enemy is too far away to reach with a spear? Or even with a stone? So someone created a way to send projectiles farther. And that is how the bow and arrow were born. For most of human existence, these primitive tools were all we had. But that was about to change. With the rise of great civilizations, weapons had to keep up with human ambition itself. The Bronze Age. One example that shows just how cruel weapons could be in the Bronze Age is the Macuahuitl, a weapon used by the Aztecs in Mesoamerica. At first glance, it looked like just a wooden club, but along its sides were embedded sharp blades of obsidian, an extremely sharp volcanic glass. The goal was not just to wound. It was to make sure the enemy wouldn't survive the wounds. Even those who escaped the attack rarely survived the consequences. In another part of the world, a weapon with a curious history appeared: the trident. Originally created for fishing, it eventually found its place in the battles of the Roman Colosseum. The gladiator known as a retiarius used a trident, a short dagger, and a fishing net, with barely any armor, against opponents far better protected than him. The strategy was clear: speed, agility, and precision. He would trap his enemies in the net and strike them with fast attacks. Interestingly, the trident rarely caused immediate fatal wounds. And that was not a flaw. It was an advantage. After all, longer fights meant more entertainment for the crowd. Still, the most common weapons of the Bronze Age were swords, spears, and slings. A small weapon, but a very powerful one. Made famous around the world because of the biblical battle between David and Goliath, where, with a single stone, young David defeats the giant Goliath. During this period, the systematic use of shields also began. In one-on-one combat, these weapons were already dangerous. But in military formations, like the famous phalanx, with soldiers advancing shoulder to shoulder, they became almost unstoppable. However, there was a problem. They weren't very effective against fortified walls and castles. These massive defensive structures protected cities, nobles, and kings. and they were already very common in the period we are entering now. The Middle Ages. Invading extremely fortified enemy castles required creative solutions. And as always, necessity was the mother of invention. That is how siege weapons appeared. Gigantic machines operated by several soldiers, designed specifically to destroy walls and gates, crushing the hopes of kings and nobles who believed they were protected. There were dozens of different siege weapon designs, but some stood out. The famous siege hook, for example, was absurdly simple. It was a structure made to grab parts of a wall and pull them down until they collapsed. It was functional, direct, and efficient. The trebuchet, originally developed in China, took terror to another level. Larger and more powerful than a catapult, it could launch stones weighing almost 200 pounds more than 900 feet away, the equivalent of 3 football fields. A nightmare for any besieged city. An incredible weapon. The ballista, in turn, worked like a giant crossbow. If an ordinary crossbow was already lethal, imagine a version enlarged to the extreme, powerful, precise, and devastating. Another iconic weapon was the battering ram, an enormous log pushed by several soldiers and repeatedly slammed into gates and walls. It worked, but using that thing must have been a nightmare. Imagine wooden splinters digging into your skin, the extreme physical effort it required, and the constant risk of it falling on your feet. While these machines dominated war on land, another type of weapon appeared to dominate the seas. Meet Greek fire. Few weapons in history caused as much fear as Greek fire. It was an extremely sticky, flammable mixture that kept burning even on water. Enemy ships simply had no way to escape. Used mainly by the Byzantine Empire, Greek fire was sprayed through tubes directly onto enemy ships, or thrown in grenade-like containers. Its effect was so devastating that the formula became one of the best-kept secrets in history. Revealing it would have meant losing an incalculable military advantage. To this day, no one knows exactly how it was produced, but it is believed to have been similar to modern incendiary substances like napalm.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
And then we reach a moment in the Middle Ages that became a major turning point, when the way wars were fought changed forever. The birth of the first firearms. Around the year 950, in China, someone came up with attaching a tube filled with gunpowder to the tip of a spear. When ignited, that tube shot flames toward the enemy. Later, pieces of metal and debris were added to the gunpowder, launching projectiles at the enemy. And so the fire lance was born, a mix between a spear, a flamethrower, and the first prototype firearm in history. This period marked the beginning of a new level of innovation and cruelty in the creation of weapons. From that point on, the goal was no longer just to win battles. It became causing the maximum amount of destruction, pain, and fear as quickly as possible. And as history would show, things would only get worse. World War I. World War I changed warfare forever. With the advances of the Industrial Revolution, new technologies began being used to kill on a scale never seen before. machine guns, grenades, tanks, and airplanes equipped with machine guns and bombs. But those were not the cruelest weapons used during this period. Not even close. Imagine you are in a trench. Days of relative calm. No sign of the enemy. Until far in the distance, a yellowish cloud appears, pushed forward by the wind. There's no one to shoot at. There is nowhere to run. It is a toxic cloud of mustard gas approaching fast. The only thing left is to run. You run, but the cloud catches you. The mustard gas starts taking effect. Your skin burns. Your eyes swell until you can't see anything. Even breathing becomes unbearable pain. Even those who survived suffered for weeks from burns, lung damage, vomiting, and blindness, agonizing until death. The use of chemical weapons was eventually banned by international treaties because their use was considered so cruel. And that was in a war that killed around 20 million people. And the war that was supposed to end all wars did not end them. When one Austrian painter decided to do terrible things, also using toxic gases but in a different context. And then came World War II. World War II followed its bloody course like any other war. Huge, bloody battles. Many soldiers and civilians dead. Pain. Destruction. Until the conflict reached an ending the world had never seen before. This is where the story of the terrifying final weapon begins. The powers fighting on both sides of the war were trapped in a desperate arms race, trying to use the recent discovery of nuclear energy to develop an enormous bomb, an ultimate weapon, a bomb so powerful and destructive that the enemy would have no choice but to surrender. When uranium-235 is compressed, it triggers a chain reaction that releases absurd amounts of energy. The United States was the first country to successfully turn this into an effective bomb. And many scientists and researchers lost their lives throughout the process that made it possible. The bomb called Little Boy was the first nuclear bomb ever used in war. Weighing more than 4 tons, Little Boy was dropped by the United States on Hiroshima, Japan, on August 6, 1945. Tens of thousands of people died instantly. And countless others later succumbed to the effects of radiation. Under a month later, the war officially came to an end when Japan surrendered. With the terror and massive destruction caused by the use of nuclear bombs in Japan, many nations around the world started racing to create the largest and most destructive nuclear bomb ever built. And soon it became clear that nuclear fission, used in the bombs up to that point, was not the limit. Nuclear fusion was even more powerful. Nuclear fusion is the same process that happens in the cores of stars, with explosions happening constantly for billions and billions of years. Some of those stars are much larger than the Sun. So imagine the force behind those explosions. That was recreated, even if only for a fraction of a second, by humans here on Earth. In 1961, the Soviet Union tested the most destructive weapon ever created by humans. That weapon was called the Tsar Bomba. The mushroom cloud from the explosion reached around 42 miles high, the equivalent of 8 Mount Everests stacked on top of each other. From that point on, it became clear that there was no real defense against this type of weapon. The only barrier became the fear of retaliation. Each nation afraid the other might use the bomb. And after all of this, what comes next? Maybe the nuclear bomb is the last great instrument of destruction humanity needs to invent. Or maybe it is just another chapter in a story that keeps repeating itself. Now I want to know from you, which of these weapons impressed you the most? Comment down below. If you enjoyed it, watch these next videos too.